Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is unthinkable. A quiet rural corner of Nova Scotia staggering under the weight of a despicable crime. One of the worst mass killings in Canadian history.
This happened in small towns. Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield are places where people have deep roots. Places where people know their neighbors and look out for one another. Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them. To the grandparent who lost a child, to the children who lost a parent, to the neighbor who lost a friend.
The RCMP say more than 18 people, men and women, are dead, plus the gunman.
It appears that some of the victims were known to the suspect, and others were targeted and not known to the suspect.
16 crime scenes are being investigated, including 5 houses burned to the ground. There may be more victims inside. For 12 hours, the gunman continued his rampage, able to keep going for so long because he was disguised, driving a mock RCMP vehicle and wearing a police uniform. Among his victims, RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson.
Our hearts are broken. My heart is broken.
Murder on this scale is hard to comprehend, that it happened in the middle of a pandemic when anxiety was already high and when people were told to stay home and to save lives just adds to the agony. It was at home that some of the victims died. We have complete coverage tonight, beginning with Elizabeth McSheffrey on what we're learning about the victims.
She was a gifted violinist, and 17-year-old Emily Tuck shared her music as a way to entertain and encourage those told to stay at home during COVID-19. Emily's mother, Jolene Oliver, said to love poetry and books, and father, Aaron Tuck, remembered as a handyman with a gift for leatherwork. Just one of many families torn apart.
The sad part is that they're all gone together, but in a way, because of how close they were, I'm glad that none of them are actually suffering for each other, because they would never be able to survive without each other. They were very close.
At a time when we're praising nurses as heroes, 2 are being honored. Heather O'Brien and Kristen Beaton both worked for the Victorian Order of Nurses, which today described O'Brien as a wife, mother, and grandmother who shared her deep caring of others as a VON nurse for nearly 17 years. And Beaton, a continuing care worker, as a caring and compassionate member of the Victorian Order of Nurses team. Lisa McCulley taught grade 3 and 4. On Twitter, her Regional Center for Education says she was beloved by both her students and colleagues. A couple, both of whom were correctional officers, are among those killed. Sean McLeod worked at the Spring Hill Institution for more than 20 years, and Alana Jenkins at the Nova Institution for Women in Truro. Another couple, Greg and Jamie Blair, ran a natural gas and propane business near the area where the massacre took place. 54-year-old Gina Goulet was a 2-time cancer survivor from Shubenacadie and an avid recreational fisher. And the regional municipality of Durham says Dawn and Frank Madsen were longtime residents of their community. Dawn was a former long-term care worker. Constable Heidi Stevenson was the first casualty to be named in the tragedy. The 23-year member of the force was killed while responding to the chaos this weekend. She leaves behind her husband and 2 children. More victims will be named in the days to come, but RCMP Constable Chad Morrison will not be one of them. The 11-year veteran made it home from the hospital on Monday and was greeted warmly by his community in Enfield. He's healing from gunshot wounds in what is perhaps the one bit of good news to emerge from this tragedy. Elizabeth McSheffrey, Global News, Halifax.
The investigation is still in the early stages. Here's what we know of the timeline. At 11:30 on Saturday night, RCMP respond to a firearms complaint in the town of Portapique. The public advised to stay inside and lock their doors. When police arrive, they find multiple casualties. Nearly 9 hours later, the RCMP tweet that officers remain on scene, calling it an active shooter situation. They identify the gunman as 51-year-old Gabriel Wortman, considered armed and dangerous. The suspect is then seen again 30 kilometers east of Portapique around Truro, driving a car that appears to be an RCMP cruiser and wearing what appears to be a police uniform. He was then seen heading from Brookfield towards Halifax along the Trans-Canada Highway. And after an encounter with police on Highway 2, drives off in a small SUV. The rampage ends in a standoff at this gas station in Enfield, near the Trans-Canada. That's where the gunman died. There is no known motive at this point. Police say no note from the gunman has been found. Ross Lord on what we do know about the investigation.
In the community where the killing spree started, it's going to take a long time for the world to make sense again.
I'm still, I believe, shocked and, befuddled. Don't really understand what's going on.
Devastated by what happened and afraid the news could become even worse.
We haven't heard from our friends, and we hope they're okay. The son has been trying to get a hold of them and still hasn't had any word.
Investigators say there are 16 crime scenes, including 5 houses burnt to the ground.
We believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
They still don't know Gabriel Wortman's motive, why he went from a professional denturist to perpetrator of one of the biggest murder sprees in Canadian history. His high school yearbook caption suggests his future may include being an RCMP officer. No one expected him to disguise himself as a Mountie so he could kill unsuspecting victims.
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. Like I said, he was just, and it's cliche, right? I mean, you see this all the time when there's a murderer, the neighbors say how quiet and friendly he was. He was.
He worked primarily at this denture clinic in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. The owner of this strip mall says Wortman rented a second clinic here in Halifax for more than 20 years, paying his rent on time, and recently driving what looked like an old police car with the decals removed, but reflective tape still visible. A picture released at the height of the rampage suggests the car had been dressed up to be an almost perfect replica.
His ability to move around the province undetected was surely greatly benefited by the fact that he had a police or a vehicle that looked identical in every way to a marked police car.
Wortman was also wearing a partial or full RCMP uniform. After the first 911 calls, Nova Scotia RCMP limited communication to its Twitter page. There was a gap of 8 hours overnight between tweets, and unlike the COVID-19 message released over the Easter weekend, there was no emergency alert, leading to some pointed questions about whether the public was sufficiently warned. There are several investigations underway into the chaotic effort to stop the gunman. The arm's-length serious incident response team will investigate the final takedown and another incident involving RCMP members discharging firearms. The Mounties themselves will review a third incident, also surrounding the use of force. Just the start of what is sure to be an unprecedented review of how this happened and how authorities responded. Donna?
Ross Lord in Halifax, thanks.